Hello, it's time for another story. If I were to give a rating to this story, I'd say it's probably PG only because of one instance that happens in it. So, it is about when I was in nursing school. I made a very good friend. We are still friends to this day. And on Fridays, she would invite me to her house for dinner sometimes. And every time I went, not once in a while, but every time I went, I wound up with an asthma attack. Now that should be a clue that you shouldn't stay longer than dinner time. Wouldn't you think? Well, one day she invited me to spend the night. And I agreed. That night, I wound up in the emergency room not once, not twice, but 3 times. On the 3rd time, I said, I'll stay. And what they did is they gave me aminophylline in an IV, which goes in very slowly, excuse me. So while this was happening, someone said, why did you decide to come to nursing school? And this is what I told them. Well, when I was a little girl, I was very precocious, you might say. I was so smart. I mean, I could learn anything in a heartbeat. It was no problem. And so when I went to kindergarten, I mastered the letters, I mastered the sounds, the colors. We even threw in puce and magenta, you know? My teacher was thrilled with me. And the only problem was the other kids kind of made fun of me and they gave me a bad time. So I would go home every day and, I'd be crying, I'd be upset. I loved learning, but it was just so hard putting up with that. So my parents loved me and they said, okay, well, we'll move. So we moved, and this time basically the same thing happened, but they thought, well, maybe if you have another activity, it'll be better. So at that point, I joined Brownies, and I loved it. I was racking up those badges like crazy. It was so much fun, except for the other girls. I learned how to tie knots, you name it, half hitch, square knot, any kind of knot that you might think of, I could do it. And then we also made pot holders. Mine had such beautiful, beautiful designs. They were just gorgeous, as well as being useful, of course. Well, the troop leaders loved me. But again, there were issues with the girls. So my parents, we moved one more time. And this time they said, Ann, we love you. We want you to be happy, but you're going to have to make this work this time because we really can't afford to move again. And I understood that. I was still young, but I understood that. So after school, sometimes I would go out on the street corner and I would tie knots. And people paid me to tie knots. And I would make extra money that way and bring it home and help my parents. Well, one day a man came up and he said, I've been watching the way that you tie knots and I'd like you to come to my knot tying factory. And I said, pshaw, I fear you lie. And I didn't go. Well, guess what? The next day, in the newspaper, there was a headline that said, billionaire finds girl who can tie knots and signs her to $1 million contract. It was a girl on another corner, and I taught her how to tie those knots. Well, I determined that was not going to happen again. Not again. So I decided instead of doing the knots, I would make potholders. So I had my looms set up. I had different color yarns so that people could choose what they wanted, and I would make the potholders. And I was doing a great job. That was making money too. And then a man came up and he said, you know, I really love the way you make those potholders. I'd like you to come to my potholder making factory. And I remembered what happened last time, and I said, okay. And he said, well, we need to sign a contract. And I went with him, and when I came home later, much later than usual, my parents were, upset. They were going like, well, where have you been? I said, signing a contract. Well, 9 months later, I had a beautiful little girl. But I was so young. I was so young, and there was no way I could be a mother. And my parents, there's no way we could afford another child. So the decision was made to give her up for adoption. And I remember the nurse bringing her over and letting me hold her and touch her perfect little fingers and toes and her beautiful little face. And then they took her away. That was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And even now, when I see a little girl who might be that age, I wonder if she's mine and if she's having a good life. It was so hard, so hard. So after that, my parents decided that we should probably move again. And this time, we moved to California. And my mother and I were out together one day, and another man came up to us. And he said, you know, little girl, I think you could be in the movies. And I just held on to my mother's hand. And he says, we just need to sign a contract. And I held on to her hand even tighter. And my mother said, well, you know what? If you want her to sign a contract, this is where we live, and you can come and talk to her father and I. Well, he did, and it was legitimate, and we signed the contract. Oh, and I was in, well, you may not know some of the titles, so I won't even bother, but I was in several movies and just did very well. And I was still going to school, so they made sure that I balanced all that. And so I was able to make enough money to buy my parents a home so that they didn't have to worry about anything anymore. And I saved up some money, quite a bit. I invested it and saved it. And when I graduated from high school, I thought, I should probably give back. I've been very blessed. And so I thought, what should I do? And so I thought back to that nurse who was so kind to me. And I thought, I think I'll become a nurse. And so I applied to nursing school, and that's why I decided to come to nursing school. At the end. So, That was just a story. You do understand that, right? None of that really happened. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a little different. Next time, I'm going to read a story. And this story is going to be about my favorite animal. Take some time and think about what could that animal be. I bet you'll figure it out. At any rate, you be blessed and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.